Thank you, Cahill. And as chairman of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture, Food and Marine, I'm glad to bring this report in front of the Dáil this evening for discussion. First of all, I want to give apologies for Deputy John McGuinness, who's unavoidably absent, and I'd like to welcome in the gallery Dan Brennan, the farmer in question, and his friends and neighbours. And I suppose in particular to show how serious this issue has been taken by the agricultural community, the President of the IFA, Florida Garment, and the President of ICMSA, Dennis Drennan, are in the gallery as well to show solidarity with Dan Brennan. I suppose we did this report at the back end of last year, and our view was that we would like to have done an independent investigation, the committee into it. And the legal representatives of the House said that was beyond the remit of the committee. And I suppose what I see, Minister, this evening here, and thank you for taking the time to be here to discuss this report with us. What I want to take from this committee, from this here this evening, is I'm earnestly requesting that an independent investigation happen into what happened on Dan Brennan's farm. And I suppose, Minister, a point I want to make at the start is this most definitely wasn't on your watch. It happened a number of years ago. I suppose we were talking historically about, something that happened, 20 years ago on the farm of Dan Brennan in Castlecomer. But there is an awful lot of unanswered questions. And one thing is certain, that Dan Brennan has suffered huge mental anguish and financial hardship about what happened on his farm. And I suppose I want to raise a number of issues here this evening, Minister, that I think will prove conclusively that an independent investigation into what the incidents on Dan Brennan's farm and what happened there needs to happen. First of all, I want to quote from 3 letters from VITs that worked in the department. And the first is a Dolan Dolan on the 15th of October 2004, who had spent 2 years on Dan Brennan's farm. And he just to quote directly from the letter that he wrote, "It has been confirmed that there is a very severe problem of ill-thrift and stunting on this farm. No infectious cause of the problem has been identified to date." Second, Pat Kelleher, head of the lab in Kilkenny, Department Lab in Kilkenny, on the 26th of October 2004. "Mr. Brennan's farm is close to an EBA licensed facility. The circumstances in which Mr. Brennan finds himself are outside his control and could not have been foreseen." And the third is a letter from John Moriarty on the 24th of May 2005. "This farm is now the subject of an interagency investigation consisting of the Department, the EPA, Tagus, Health Board and County Council, in accordance with specific guidelines of the protocol for the investigation approach to serious animal-human health problems. The activation by the state of this protocol is only made in very exceptional cases. We have carried out extensive testing, analysis and feed trials, but have not yet identified the cause of or a possible solution to the problem. The circumstances in which Mr. Brennan finds himself are outside his control and could not have been foreseen. Mr. Brennan has implemented all recommendations given to him by both the laboratory and Tagus. Mr. Brennan has been extremely cooperative throughout this investigation and has invested huge time and financial resources in assisting us with this investigation. However, the problem still continues." And I suppose, the full copy, I have the full copies of those letters if the Minister wants them, but they were 3 department vets who stated clearly that there was an issue that they couldn't comprehend happening on Dan Brennan's farm. Why did the department allow the lab to publish a report saying that it was Dan Brennan's disease management that was a problem on his farm? Michael Sheridan, the Deputy Chief Veterinary Inspector, was one of 15 people present at a meeting in the New Park Hotel in June 2006. Also present were representatives of Tagus, Kilkenny Regional Veterinary Laboratory, UCD Vet College, the EPA, Kilkenny County Council, Dan Brennan's Vets, Limerick University and a scientist from North Carolina. The UCD Vet College had done an epidemiology report on the farm, and they told the lab in Kilkenny and Michael Sheridan it was not disease, and the Vet College proved this later when they took over the farm by blood testing every 2 weeks for a period of 2 years, and there was no disease found. So I think again, Minister, that's an extremely important point, that for the Veterinary College did extensive blood testing on the animals on Dan Brennan's farm and no disease was found with that testing. Why did the department ignore Tom Slevin when he told him our cattle had bones growing in their soft tissue, their vertebrae could be cut with a knife? He had never seen this before in his 45 years as a vet. 11 of the 40 cattle that died early on in that investigation and were post-mortemed. And I think there's a number of important points to be made here about the post-mortems. To me, you know, tissue, that bones were soft and that bones were going out of the tissue of the animals. Like, you know, that is, to say that is unusual, you know, it would be very much understating the mark. And, you know, it was agreed that a pathologist from the UK would come. I think there was 2 names given to the department at the time that independent post-mortems would be done. That never happened. And, like, you know, for animals to have bones growing out of their kidneys, it's something extraordinary, unusual. And there had to be some extraordinary reason for that to be happening. And I think that point alone, in my view, merits an investigation as to why there wasn't independent post-mortems done. And, you know, the results of those post-mortems have never, ever been explained, how animals, you know, could have such internal issues happening to them. Tigers Kilkenny wrote to the EPA saying that there was something really seriously wrong on Dan Brennan's farm in January 2003. And they stated that the management of the farm was not the problem. They said that the EPA said this was something they had never seen before. Jack Gardner, who was the Dean of UCD, was commissioned to do a study. And he concluded that 45 acres on the farm were affected by pollution, that the trees, the ditches, etc. were being affected by pollution. And in his view, it was caused by fluoride. And again, and I think, you know, this is an extremely serious point again, Minister. This case was taken to Brussels. And, you know, I watched the videos of the hearings in Brussels. And the video in 2012 shows Mairead McGuinness, who was an MEP at the time, at the Joint Research Committee, that stated that the Joint Research Committee would look at this. Department of Agriculture and the EPA were there. Dan Brennan got a phone call in July that year from a person on the committee stating that there was political interference in his case and that this would not progress any further. And that was the end of what happened in Brussels. And I want to read an extract from a letter that was sent to yourself, Minister, and I got a copy of it as well, from a retired circuit court judge. And I'm just reading an extracted letter, and obviously you have a full copy of the letter, but I want to read it into the Dáil record. Another area of political concern is this. The issues in question were before the Parliamentary Committee of the European Parliament in the years 2010, 2011 and 2012. On the last occasion, the recording confirms that the matter was adjourned for further investigation and was due to be revisited by the committee upon the conclusion of such investigation. What followed is something which ought to cause a great deal of concern to those, and particularly parliamentarians, who uphold proper standards and procedures in our democratic institutions. The case never came back before the committee, and the investigation in question appears to have never taken place. Instead, the file was sent to Ireland, apparently for consideration by a parliamentary committee in this jurisdiction. There was, however, not so much as a covering note in this regard. What's even more troubling is that this decision was not made by the European Committee sitting in either open or closed session. Rather, it appears to be decided upon by the committee's secretariat. The strong suspicion of political interference is inescapable. It is worth noting that the effect of this transfer was the investigation by the state on inter alia 2 organs of Irish state, your department and the EPA. Thereafter, it took a full decade before the matter came to be considered at municipal level, and then only after extremely dogged persistence on the part of Dan Brennan and his advisers, without which, undoubtedly, it would never have seen the light of day. Of even greater concern is the fact that Dan Brennan has been denied access to this file in all the years since it arrived in this country. On what basis can such refusal be justified? If there ever such a basis has never been communicated to Dan Brennan or his advisers or his supporters, and we're interested to hear how this can be justified when we next speak on this matter in the Dáil. That's a letter from a retired circuit court judge, and I know, Minister, you have a copy of it. And how a case can go to Brussels like that and not have a conclusion to its hearing is extremely hard to explain. Tagus in Moore Park in September 2004 told the department it was cardamom poisoning that was affecting the cattle on Dan Brennan's farm, and that had even found it in the chutes on the cattle sheds. The department didn't test for cadmium when they were getting the vet college to do the testing, when the vet college took over the investigation for the Department of Agriculture. Jim Creddy, who was the vet for Tagus Moore Park, rang the vet college to test for cadmium, and it was then that had showed up in the bloods of the cattle on Dan Brennan's farm. In December 2008, the vet college told Dan Brennan, Tom Slevin and Michael Lamb that it was cadmium poisoning, and his cattle had 95% of the symptoms. They told us the report would be out in 2009. They told Dan and his vets it would be 10 to 12 years before you notice any major improvement. They told him not to get out of cows as they have a level of tolerance built up to the pollution. And I suppose, to be remiss of me this evening here not to remember Pádraig Walsh as well, the former president of the IFA, who put a huge amount of work into pressing Dan's case. I meant to mention him at the start. When the vet college found high cadmium levels in the bloods of Dan Brennan's cattle, they wrote to the EPA to know how much cadmium per hour was coming out of the factory. The EPA told him it was 1 gram per hour, but in actual fact, the reading was 1,000 times higher. It was 1 kilogram. Why then did no alarm bells go off in the EPA when the test in 2004 showed almond brick were emanating 88 times the German guidelines of cadmium? Why was there no record of any more cadmium testing done after this stage, especially after Moore Park telling the department that there was cadmium poisoning the cattle had? Tagus found when the trials were being done on the farm, the cattle were eating 12.5% over normal, and despite this, they were losing weight. Sick or diseased cattle don't eat. And there was extensive trials done on the farm where cattle from a neighbouring farm were brought in, fodder from a neighbouring farm was brought in, cattle from Dan Brennan's farm were taken away to an outside farm to be fed. And all clearly showed that once animals were on Dan Brennan's farm, they didn't thrive and suffered serious ill thrive. Why did the department ignore Michael Lamb's, Dan Brennan's vet, when he told him there was a toxic agent at work? He had ruled out all other causes on the farm in 2002. Minister, why did the department ignore the vet college in April 2004 when they told them the farm needed to be looked at from a helicopter view, that something in the area was affecting the farm? And again, and I suppose this is cutting very close to the bone for a lot of people in the Castlecomer area, but in 2007, the parish priest in Castlecomer said in public at a funeral, "This is the 8th worker I have buried from almond brick in the last 12 years. And there were others buried in other parishes that I did not celebrate their funeral mass. The priest said, off at the altar at a funeral mass, will someone please do something about this?" The department rang Dan in October 2009 and told him a little glitch had happened. The cadmium found in the samples over a 6-month period had accidentally been put in the lab and did not come out of the factory. How could this happen in an EPA-accredited lab? The fact that samples were taken, and I'd have to say that it looks like they didn't want to test the samples that they took from Dan Brennan's farm, and they waited until the results would not be accurate. There is a strong correlation between increasing cadmium levels in the body of the animals and weight loss in the animals. Furthermore, eosinophils of the blood occurred at levels of 11.5%. Scientific data confirming these links proves exposure of Dan's animals to toxic levels of cadmium. Minister, I raised a huge amount of questions there in what I've been saying, and there's other points I can raise. But what I'm asking is, and I'm asking the most earnestly, as Chairman of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture, Food and the Marine, that you would have an independent investigation into what happened. And let's get answers to the questions, and I have another 9 or 10 on the list in front of me. Questions that need to be asked on behalf of Dan Brennan, and answers need to be given to him. And I have met Dan Brennan on a lot of occasions over the last number of years, and I find him a most genuine man. And all he wants is answers to the questions that he's asking, and justification that the losses that were incurred in his farm and the losses that were incurred, what was happening to his cattle, was outside of his control and had nothing got to do with the farming practices practiced by Dan Brennan and his family.
Thank you, Deputy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Deputy Cahill, and thanks to yourself and your committee for your work in relation to this and for commissioning this report on the environmental impact of local industrial emissions in Castlecomer, County Kilkenny, which you completed last year. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Dan Brennan and his colleagues and the farm representatives and the two farm presidents, Francie Gorman and Dennis Drennan here today as well, and other representatives and supporters. I know, Cahill, your report deals with the issues that Mr Brennan and his advisers have raised with regards to the environmental impact allegedly caused by industrial emissions from a brick factory, and I know your committee has put very significant work and time into it and held a number of meetings in relation to assessing it as well. I know the clear ask from all of you collectively is that there's a further review and assessment of what happened. I undertook, whenever we discussed this most recently in relation to a topical issue, to assess the matter further. Also requested if there's any additional further information. Obviously, with the passage of time, there isn't any new information, but I know there's a lot of there's significant assessments having been done previously. And while I don't see any basis as such from my own assessments of it, I think an acknowledgement of the work that your committee have done and the questions that you're raising, I think it's appropriate that I would have a separate and independent review of my own department's investigation, any information that fed into that as well, to look at this further and to feed back and look at what has been done here. Obviously, as 20 years is a long time, and there's a lot of water under the bridge in relation to it. But I do respect the work of the committee and the priority and time which you've collectively given to this issue and the assessment that you've made. And I think it's fair in recognition of that I would ask somebody independent to review the department's work in relation to and investigation in relation to this, and also any information alongside that too. I think it's important also just today as well, Cahill, to recount the work that has been carried out by a number of state agencies since these events occurred some 20 years or more ago. In 2003, the problems reported in Mr Brennan's herd were initially investigated by the Regional Veterinary Laboratory in Kilkenny, and because of the severity and the intractable nature, Cahill, of the problem experienced on the farm, a legitimate question was raised about the possibility of environmental pollution playing a role in Mr Brennan's farming difficulties. Having looked at all of the options and given the gravity of the situation, an interagency group was convened in line with the protocol for the investigative approach to serious animal and human health issues. The substantial resources required to convene an interagency group meant that this decision wasn't taken lightly. The decision to do so reflected the serious consideration given to Mr Brennan's farm, the possible risks to the environment and the potential human health concerns that were also raised at that time. The interagency group comprised relevant and expert bodies of the state with competence to assess on a scientific and objective basis whether or not environmental pollution could have a role to play in the farm's difficulties. The group was not in any way dismissive of the possibility that environmental pollution was a factor in the issues on the farm. Indeed, the opposite was the case, because the group was expressly established to explore that possibility. The group comprised the experts from the department's veterinary laboratories, Teagasc, the South Eastern Health Board, as it then was, and Kilkenny County Council. And the Environmental Protection Agency, as the body with specific expertise and responsibility for monitoring the control of environmental pollution, was also a member of the group. This joint and combined scientific investigation into Mr Brennan's difficulties and the wider environment was impartial, detailed and substantial. The Veterinary Laboratories report in June 2006 details the comprehensive field and laboratory investigations undertaken on the farm. In tandem with the investigation, and during the latter part of 2005, my department funded a comprehensive animal health programme on the farm. On the foot of this, I understand that animal health and production on the farm had shown a definite improvement from the first 5 months of 2006. Subsequently, and on foot of a request by Mr Brennan and his advisors, University College Dublin's Centre of Veterinary Epidemiology and Risk Analysis, or CVERA, was commissioned to conduct further epidemiological studies on the farm. The CVERA report was completed in August 2009. Teagasc carried out animal production investigations, which included animal feeding and nutrition trials in 2003, between 2003 and 2005, and trace element analysis in 2004, and soil and herbage investigations in 2007 in support of the additional investigations of CVERA and the EPA. Substantial and in-depth investigations were conducted by the EPA into the following matters. Firstly, fluoride emissions analysed by University College Cork. Also, tree survey conducted by UCD School of Agriculture. An Environmental Protection Agency reports on licence parameters and compliance monitoring. Also, continuous emissions monitoring system outputs, as well as dispersion modelling of cadmium emissions. And 2, production records in relation to material safety data sheets, and also grass and soil analysis. And finally, independent peer review of the work of the operations of the brick factory by US and UK environmental experts. The HSE reviewed human health parameters as part of the interagency group investigations. This involved an examination of any unusual patterns of human illness in the area. Kilkenny County Council carried out assessments of the farm, or of the water in the farm. The interagency report of 2010 has regard to all of the reports by the different agencies involved. On the basis of scientific evaluation of these investigations, the interagency group issued its conclusions in its final report of August 2010. I understand that at all stages Mr Brennan was kept apprised of ongoing studies and received the reports as they were completed. Mr Brennan and his advisors were also provided with opportunities to raise any concerns that they may have had about the ongoing investigations. I'm also advised that Mr Brennan also sought a meeting with the authors of the 2009 CVERA report before the final draft was completed, and on both occasions Mr Brennan was given the opportunity to correct any factual errors or omissions in these reports. The final interagency report in 2010 specifically concluded that there was no evidence of environmental pollution, cadmium or fluoride impact on the health of animals on Mr Brennan's farm. These conclusions were based on wide-ranging chemical and pathological analysis of blood and tissues of animals from the farm and from extensive environmental analysis. I wish to acknowledge, again, Cahill, the report of your joint committee and your members' committee, and specifically note as well that your committee disagree with some of the conclusions of the interagency report. However, it is evident that at the time the effort by the state to get to the bottom of the matter was significant. The agencies involved were there to serve the public interest, and I don't have any reason to believe that their efforts were intended to do anything other than to establish the facts in relation to this matter. Notwithstanding the significant scientific work carried out by the 5 agencies as part of the interagency group, which concluded with findings in the interagency report of 2010, I do appreciate very much the human element of this and acknowledge the stress experienced by Mr Brennan and his family by the health issues in his heart, which undoubtedly have been very difficult. So in recognition of that and of the work of your committee, Cahill, and the ask of your committee, I will move now to seek an independent review of my department's investigation into this, and also the reports that would have fed into that as well, and to report back to me. So thanks again to the work of your committee in terms of giving time and attention and looking into this, and for coming forward with your final report and bringing it before the Dáil here. And again, I acknowledge the presence of Dan Brennan here today, and many of his supporters and colleagues as well. Indeed, Minister Noonan here as well. So, Gurmila Mayaga.